When that teacher looked my grandson straight in his little 10-year-old eyes and called him a liar in front of the whole class, something in me went still, the kind of still that comes right before thunder. I was sitting in the hallway outside room 3B, clutching my purse in my lap like it could shield me from what I'd just heard through the cracked door. My daughter Keisha had asked me to pick Jamal up early because she had a double shift at the hospital. I'd arrived a few minutes ahead of time, thinking I'd wait quietly. Then Mrs. Harrington's voice rose sharp enough to cut glass. "Jamal, I've had just about enough of your stories. A 4-star general. Really? Your father is a general in the United States Army." She laughed, not kindly. "Boys and girls, this is what happens when we let imagination run wild instead of telling the plain truth." The room went silent except for the squeak of chairs. I could picture my grandson sitting there, shoulders folded in like he was trying to make himself smaller. He has his daddy's proud chin. But right then I knew it was trembling. I stood up before I even decided to move. "But let me take you back, because none of this makes sense without knowing how carefully we built our lives, how hard we tried to protect our children from the same knives that cut us when we were coming up. My name is Evelyn Marie Carter, but the babies in my family have called me Mama Eve since my first granddaughter learned to talk. I'm 68 years old. Raised 4 children in Anacostia before we finally moved out to Fort Washington when Marcus became a colonel. Most folk just see a church hat-wearing grandma who still cooks Sunday dinner for 20 people like it's nothing. They don't know, I used to change diapers with one hand while grading papers with the other, because teachers didn't make enough, and the Army sure didn't pay Marcus what he was worth back then either. Marcus, my husband of 43 years, is a quiet man, tall, dark, like good coffee with nothing in it. And he still stands straight as a flagpole even though retirement's been trying to bend him these last 5 years. He doesn't talk much about the stars on his shoulder. Never did. When people ask what he did in the Army, he says, "I served," and changes the subject. That's just his way. Our youngest, Anthony, is Jamal's daddy. He followed his father into the service. But Anthony always wanted to fly. He's a chief warrant officer now, helicopters mostly, stationed up at Joint Base Andrews. That boy has been gone so much of Jamal's life that sometimes I think my grandson knows his daddy better through FaceTime than in person. But every time Anthony comes home on leave, he and Jamal are thick as thieves' two heads bent over model airplanes, laughing about things only pilots understand. Jamal is a dreamer with a big mouth and an even bigger heart. He'll tell you the sky is purple if it gets a laugh. But he does not lie about his family. Not ever. We taught him that blood is the one thing you never play with. So that morning, when I heard that woman sneer at my grandson like his truth was make-believe, I felt every year I spent teaching 3rd grade myself come rushing back the way some teachers look at little black boys and see problems before they ever see children. I knew that tone. I'd fought that tone. I pushed the door open slow enough that the hinges didn't squeak. 20-8. Little faces turned toward me. Mrs. Harrington's mouth was still open mid. Jamal's eyes found mine across the room, wide and glassy, and I saw the exact second he realized I'd heard everything. "Afternoon, everybody," I said, calm as Sunday morning. "I'm here to pick up Jamal Carter a little early." Mrs. Harrington recovered first. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, blonde hair pulled back so tight it stretched her smile. "Are you a relative?" "I'm his grandmother." I walked down the aisle, my good Sunday shoes clicking soft on the tile. I put my hand on Jamal's shoulder. He was shaking. "Baby, go on and get your backpack." He hesitated, looking at the teacher like he needed permission to breathe. That almost broke me right there. "It's all right, Jamal," I told him. "You're coming with me?" Mrs. Harrington folded her arms. "Actually, ma'am, we were in the middle of career week presentations. Jamal was just explaining that his father is a 4-star general." She said it like she was tasting something sour. I was trying to teach the children the importance of honesty. I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for the clock on the wall to tick 5 times. "Ma'am," I said, voice low, "my son-in-law is Lieutenant General Anthony Carter, United States Army. Currently serving as Deputy Commanding General of the 1st Cavalry Division out of Fort Cavall. On temporary assignment here in D.C. He has 4 stars on his shoulder." "Yes, ma'am, he does." The room was so quiet I could hear Jamal's backpack zipper. Mrs. Harrington's face went pink, then white. I wasn't aware. That's the problem right there," I said gently. "You weren't aware, but you were sure to call a child a liar." I squeezed Jamal's shoulder. "Come on, baby." We were almost to the door when she found her voice again. "Mrs. Ma, single quote Sim, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The children were sharing, and some of the stories were imaginative. I stopped. Turned slow. Double quotes Mrs. Harrington. My grandson stood up in front of his class and told the truth about his daddy. You stood up in front of those same children and taught them that a little black boy from the East Side can't possibly have a daddy important enough to be believed. I let that sit. That's not imagination. That's something else entirely. Jamal's small hand slipped into mine. His fingers were ice cold. I was about to walk out when the door opened again behind us, and there he was, my son, Anthony Tremaine Carter, in his service dress uniform, the silver stars catching the fluorescent light like they were made of lightning. Every child in that room gasped at the same time. Anthony filled that doorway like God had measured it special for him that morning. 6'4", shoulders that still carried the weight of wars most folks only see on television. And those 4 stars shining bright against the dark green wool. His cover was tucked under one arm, the way they teach them in uniform regulations. But his eyes, Lord, those eyes went straight to his son. Jamal let go of my hand and ran. Not walked, not shuffled, ran. His little sneakers squeaked all the way across the tile until he crashed into his daddy's legs. Anthony dropped to one knee right there in front of everybody, arms wrapping around that child like he could shield him from every hurt that had ever been aimed his way. I got you, soldier, Anthony murmured into Jamal's curls. Daddy's here. I watched Mrs. Harrington's face go through every shade known to man. The children were whispering now, loud enough that the words "that's really him" and "look at the stars" floated around the room like butterflies. Anthony stood up slow, keeping one hand on Jamal's shoulder. Then he looked at the teachersteady.com. The way he looks at young officers who've made a serious mistake but still deserve the chance to fix it. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep and even, "I believe I owe you an introduction. Lieutenant General Anthony Carter. I'm Jamal's father." Mrs. Harrington opened her mouth. Nothing came out except a small squeak. Anthony wasn't finished. "I took leave the minute my son told me he was presenting today. Flew in from Texas this morning. My wife is on shift at Walter Reed and couldn't get away, so I thought I'd surprise him." He glanced down at Jamal, who was staring up at him like the sun had walked into the classroom. Looks like the surprise went both ways. One of the little girls in the front row raised her hand like she was still in class. "Sir, are you really a general?" Anthony smiled then. "The one that makes his dimples show and reminds me he's still the same boy who used to fall asleep on my couch with a Game Boy in his hand." "Yes, ma'am, I am." The room erupted. Children talking over each other, chairs scraping, somebody yelling. I knew Jamal wasn't lying. Mrs. Harrington tried to get control. Children, inside voices, but it was too late. The damage and the healing were happening at the same time. Anthony lifted a hand. Gentle, and the room quieted like he'd flipped a switch. That's command presence. They don't teach that at West Point. It's just born in some men. "I'm happy to answer questions," he told the class. "But first I need to speak with your teacher for a moment. Jamal, you sit with your grandmother." I guided Jamal to a desk near the window. He was shaking again, but this time with pride instead of shame. I sat beside him, smoothing his twists the way I used to smooth Anthony's when he was small, and the world felt too big. Mrs. Harrington had found her legs. She walked to the door where Anthony waited, gesturing her into the hallway. I could see them through the glass panel, her arms wrapped tight around herself. His posture straight but not unkind. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her shoulders start to fold inward. Saw her nod too many times. Saw her wipe under her eyes once. Quick. Like she hoped nobody noticed. 5 minutes later, Anthony came back in alone. Mrs. Harrington stayed in the hall. He stood at the front of the room, looking at every child slow and deliberately. "I want y'all to listen to me," he began. "Every one of you has a story worth telling. Every one of you comes from somebody who loves you, who's fighting for you even when you can't see it. Don't ever let anybody make you feel small for telling the truth about where you come from. You understand me?" A chorus of "yes, sir" answered him. These children would VA called him sir, even if he'd been a private. He spent the next 20 minutes letting them try on his cover. Touch the stars, ask every question under the sun. "Do you know the president? Have you ever been shot at? Can you fly Air Force One?" He answered, every one with patience and a little bit of laughter. When the bell rang for dismissal, children lined up to shake his hand like he was the mayor. Mrs. Harrington slipped back in near the end, eyes red, standing quietly by her desk. As we walked out, she called softly, "General Carter." He turned. "I owe your family an apology. I made an assumption I had no right to make. I'm deeply sorry." Anthony studied her for a long second. "Ma'am," he said, "we all make mistakes. The measure of a person is what they do after. You take care of these children, teach them better than what happened today. That'll be enough of an apology enough." He tipped his head, polite as always, and we left in the car. Jamal couldn't stop talking. "Mama Eve, did you see her face? Did you see everybody looking at Daddy like he was Captain America?" I laughed till tears came. "I saw, baby, I surely did." But that night, after we'd eaten smothered pork chops, and Jamal was asleep hugging the little challenge coin his daddy gave him, Anthony and I sat out on the back porch like we'd done 100 times before. The cicadas were singing something fierce. Fireflies blinked across the yard. He was quiet for a long time, rolling that coin between his fingers. "I almost didn't come," he said finally. "Flight got delayed twice. I sat in that airport thinking maybe I should just let him do the poster with the old photo like we planned. Didn't want to make a big show." I waited. Anthony doesn't talk just to hear himself. When he was 6 months old, he went on, voice low, "I was deployed. Missed his first steps. First words. First everything. I promised God if he'd bring me home safe, I'd never miss another thing that mattered." He looked over at me. "I almost missed today." "You didn't." I told him. "No," he said, "but that teacher almost made my son feel like he had to hide me just to be believed." His jaw tightened. "I've been called worse than a liar on 3 continents, Mama Eve. I can take it. He shouldn't have to." I reached over and covered his big hand with mine. "She learned something today," I said. "So did those children. Sometimes the Lord uses our pain to teach somebody else's lesson." He nodded slowly. "It still hurts though." "I know, baby, I know." We sat there until the moon climbed high, 2 generations carrying the same tired hearts, listening to the night settle soft around us. The next morning, I thought the storm had passed. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jamal singing some little rap he made up about my daddy got stars, my daddy got bars. I smiled into my robe, thinking children heal quickly, and maybe that was the end of it. WASN single quotes. By 9 o'clock, my phone started buzzing like a beehive. First Keisha, then my sister Ruth, then the church group chat. Somebody's cousin had recorded the whole thing on their phone. Anthony walking in, the children gasping, Mrs. Harrington turning colors. By noon, it was all over Facebook, then Twitter, then one of those big news pages with the blue check. 4-star general shuts down teacher who called his son a liar. They even slowed down the moment. Anthony knelt to hug Jamal and added dramatic music. Lord have mercy. I don't use social media the way the young folks do, but I know enough to see the comments were a war zone. Some people cheered, some people called the teacher every name under the sun, some saying she was the real victim of woke culture. My spirit got heavy reading it. I closed the phone and went to knead biscuit dough like my life depended on it. Keisha came by after her shift, still in scrubs, eyes tired but fierce. "Mama, the principal called me into a meeting tomorrow," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "They want to discuss the incident." "What kind of discussion?" I asked, already knowing. "The kind where they protect their own." She rubbed her temples. "Mrs. Harrington has been there 12 years, tenure, union, the works." I set the rolling pin down harder than I meant to. Flour puffed up like smoke. "So they gone act like our baby wasn't humiliated in front of 30 children. Keisha gave a tired laugh. "Pretty much. Anthony was still in town. He'd extended his leave to Daiso. The 3 of us sat at my kitchen table, like we were planning a military operation instead of a parent conference. Jamal was upstairs playing at night, thinking everything was fixed because his daddy showed up in uniform. Anthony listened more than he talked. Finally he said, "I don't want her fired." Keisha and I both looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He held up a hand. "Hear me out. Firing her makes her a martyr to half the internet. She keeps her job. She has to look at the truth every day. She has to teach children who now know exactly what an assumption looks like. That's harder." I understood what he was saying, but understanding and liking are 2 different things. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock the next day. Principal Ramirez, assistant principal, Mrs. Harrington, the guidance counselor, Keisha, Anthony, and me. They tried to tell me only parents could come. Keisha told them, "Come as you please. My mama has educational guardianship when I'm on shift. And she's a retired DCPS teacher with 38 years in the system. She stays." They didn't argue after that. We walked in together, Anthony in civilian clothes, this time, polo shirt and slacks, but you could still feel the rank on him like heat coming off pavement. Mrs. Harrington was already seated, eyes puffy, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. She stood when we entered. actually stood. General Carter, Mrs. Carter, Ms. Evelyn, she started, voice shaking. Before anyone says anything, I need to say again how sorry I am. I've barely slept. I replayed that moment 1,000 times, and every time I hear myself laugh. She stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth. I was wrong. Full stop. I judged a child by where I thought he came from instead of listening to what he was trying to tell me. Principal Ramirez started talking about protocols and sensitivity training, but Mrs. Harrington held up her hand. With respect, Dr. Ramirez, may I finish? He nodded. She looked straight at Keisha. Your son is bright, kind, and funny. He's one of my best readers, and I made him feel small because I couldn't imagine his truth being bigger than my prejudice. I can't undo that day, but I can promise it will never happen again, not to Jamal, not to any child in my care. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a letter, sealed, addressed to Jamal in careful teacher handwriting. I wrote him an apology. I'd like to read it to him myself, in front of the class, if that's all right with you. And I've asked to be removed from the equity committee because I clearly have more learning to do before I'm fit to lead anybody else. The room was quiet enough to hear the air conditioning click on. Anthony spoke first. Ma'am, courage looks like owning the mess you made while everybody's still standing in it. Thank you. Keisha's eyes were wet, but she nodded. We accept your apology, and Jamal will too. He's a better Christian than all of us put together. I didn't say much in that meeting. I was too busy watching a white woman in a suburban school choose humility over pride, watching my daughter choose grace over the rage I knew lived in her chest, watching my son-in-law choose restoration over retaliation. When we walked out, the hallway smelled like floor wax and cafeteria tater tots, same as it did 40 years ago when I taught in buildings just like this one. Some things change slowly. That afternoon, Mrs. Harrington read her letter to the class. Jamal told me later, she cried, and half the kids cried, and then they all hugged it out like it was the last day of school. Children forgive faster than the rest of us know how to. But grown folks kept talking. The video stayed online. Reporters called the house. One station even parked outside the school. Anthony gave one interview measured, talking about belief and dignity and the weight little black boys carry before they even know what the word burden means. Then he shut it down. My family's privacy matters more than anybody's clicks, he told them, and that was that. A week later, I was in the beauty shop under the dryer when Miss Loretta leaned over and said, Eve, you see this? She showed me her phone. Mrs. Harrington had posted on the school's public page, not defending herself, not asking for sympathy, just a photograph of 28 handmade apology cards the children had written to Jamal. And her own words, underneath, I was the student who needed the hardest lesson this month. These children taught me that truth doesn't need permission to be believed. I will spend the rest of my career earning back the trust I broke in 1 minute. The comments underneath weren't all kind, but a whole lot of them were from other teachers saying, thank you for showing us what accountability looks like. I sat there under that hot dryer and felt something loosen in my chest. I didn't even know was knotted. Time has a way of softening edges, but it doesn't erase them completely. Summer came gently that year. Anthony's leave ended, and he flew back to Texas. The stars on his shoulder took him away again. But this time Jamal stood taller at the airport gate, waving until the plane was just a speck. Something had shifted in that boy. He still talked too much and left his sneakers everywhere, but when he spoke about his daddy now, there was steel under the pride. Mrs. Harrington kept her word. Every Friday, she sent home a little note in Jamal's folder, nothing big, just a sentence or two. Jamal helped a new student feel welcome today. Jamal read 3 chapters, aloud with perfect expression. Jamal reminded the class that everyone's story matters. Keisha would read them at the kitchen table and smile, in a way she hadn't in years. One October afternoon, the school called and asked if Jamal could be featured in the district's Why I'm Proud of My Family bulletin board for Black History Month. They wanted a picture of him with Anthony in uniform. Keisha hesitated. She still hated the idea of her baby being anybody's poster child, but Jamal begged, Mama, please. I want everybody to see what I already know. So we did it. Anthony flew in for the weekend, and we took the photo right there on my front steps. Jamal, in his little blazer, Anthony kneeling so the stars were at eye level with his son, both of them smiling like the world couldn't touch them. The picture went up in the hallway outside. 3B. Children stopped to look every day. Some saluted it when they thought nobody was watching. I thought that would be the end of the story. A hard lesson, a public apology, a little boy standing taller. Neat bow, amen, but the Lord doesn't always tie bows. Sometimes he leaves threads hanging, so you remember the cloth was torn in the first place. It was late November when Keisha came through my door with a face I hadn't seen since her divorce papers from Jamal's biological father were signed. "Mama," she said, voice thin, "you need to sit down." She laid her phone on the table between us. An email from the principal. Mrs. Harrington had been reassigned, not fired, reassigned, to a brand new magnet school opening across the county. Bigger budget, better test scores, more desirable posting. The email called it a promotion, in recognition of her leadership and growth. It was signed by the superintendent himself. Keisha's hands were shaking. They moved her up and out, away from the kids she hurt, away from any real consequence. They waited till the news cycle died, then swept it under a prettier rug. I read it twice. The words didn't change. All that public repentance, all those tears and letters and promises, and the system still protected its own. Mrs. Harrington would never have to walk past that photograph in the hallway again. She'd never have to look Jamal in the eye and remember what her doubt cost him. I felt the old anger rise hot, familiar, the same anger that kept me standing in parent-teacher conferences 30 years ago when they tried to put my children in special classes for no reason but their zip code. Keisha was crying now, quiet. "I thought we won, Mama. I really thought speaking up mattered." I pulled her into my arms like she was 6 years old again, and the world had scraped her knee. "Baby," I whispered, "sometimes winning doesn't look like we expect. Sometimes it looks like a little boy who knows his truth is big enough to stand on, whether anybody believes him or not." But that night, after Keisha went home, I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile gone cold. I was proud of Jamal, proud of Anthony, proud of the way we handled it with dignity. But dignity doesn't always fill the hole Injustice leaves behind, so I did something I hadn't done since I retired. I put on my good Navy suit, the one I wore when I used to go before the school board, and I drove myself to the district administration building the next morning. I walked right past the receptionist who tried to stop me, straight into the superintendent's outer office. His secretary knew me from back in the day. She took one look at my face and buzzed me without a word. Dr. Edwards stood up when I entered, tall man, light-skinned, always smiling in the newspapers. The smile faltered when he saw it was me. Double quotes, "Ms. Carter," he started. "This is unexpected." I laid the folder I'd brought on his desk. Inside were copies of every email, every news article, every apology note, the original complaint, and most important, the stack of letters parents had written after the incident. Not just black parents, Latino parents, white parents whose children came home talking about fairness and truth. 37 letters in all. "I'm not here to scream," I told him, calm as I could manage. "I'm here to remind you that moving Mrs. Harrington doesn't erase what happened. It teaches every child in that building that grown folks can wound you deeply, say sorry, pretty, and still get rewarded if they know the right people." He started to speak. I raised one finger. "I'm almost done. You can promote that woman if her test scores make you look good, but understand this. Every time you move a teacher who showed bias instead of making them stay and fix what they broke, you tell little black and brown children their pain is disposable, and one day they'll remember who taught them that lesson." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "My grandson will be fine," I said. "He's got a daddy with 4 stars and a mama who fights battles in the ICU every night. But there are children still sitting in that classroom who don't have anybody coming behind them. You think about that when you sign the next transfer papers." I walked out with my head high, heels clicking the same rhythm they clicked when I marched for my own children all those years ago. 2 weeks later, the transfer was quietly reversed. Mrs. Harrington stayed at the school. The promotion disappeared like it never existed. Nobody announced it. No press release. Just a new schedule in teachers' mailboxes. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's a whisper only the people who need to hear it catch. Mrs. Harrington saw me at the winter concert a month later. She was helping children into angel costumes backstage. Our eyes met across the chaos. She gave me a small nod, respectful, a little afraid, a lot humbled. I nodded back. The circle wasn't perfect, but it was closed. Years have a way of slipping past like church fans on a hot Sunday. You think you're paying attention? But one day you look up and the baby you carried on your hip is driving himself to high school. Graduation. Jamal is 17 now, tall as his daddy, voice deep enough to make old ladies smile when he says yes, ma'am. He still calls me Mama Eve, still eats 3 helpings of my candied yams, Still leaves his size 13 sneakers where I can trip over them. Some things don't change, and I thank God for it. Mrs. Harrington stayed at the school. She never got that magnet school promotion, and I heard through the grapevine she turned down to others just like it. She teaches 5th grade now. Jamal had her again in 5th by his own choice. Said he wanted to close the story right. He told me one night, sitting on the same back porch where Anthony and I once counted fireflies, that she cried the first day he walked into her classroom. Not dramatic tears. Just quiet ones she kept wiping away while taking attendance. When she got to his name, she looked up, smiled like it hurt, and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Carter. It's good to see you." Jamal told her, "It's good to be seen, ma'am. I swear that boy is wiser than all of us. He graduated elementary school with the Principal's Award for Character." Mrs. Harrington handed him the certificate herself. The picture is still on my mantle, her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling like two people who walked through fire and came out on the other side holding each other's stories. People ask me sometimes if I hate her. I tell them the truth. Hate is a heavy coat, and I laid it down a long time ago. I still see her at the grocery store every few months. She always speaks first, calls me Ms. Evelyn, asks about the family with real interest in her eyes. I ask about her daughter. She had a little girl a few years after everything happened. We talk about the price of eggs and the best way to keep deer out of azaleas. Normal things, human things. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means deciding the memory won't own you anymore. Anthony retired last year. Full 4-star pension, ceremony at the Pentagon. The whole thing. They offered him a big office and a bigger title in the private sector, but he turned it down. Said he'd spent 35 years away from home and it was time to sit still. Now he coaches. Jamal's lacrosse team assistant coach. Because the head coach was smart enough to know you don't argue with a man who once commanded a division. You should see them on that sideline. Anthony, in his army hoodie, arms crossed, quiet, and Jamal flying down the field like the wind itself is related to him. Kasia got her nurse practitioner license, works in pediatrics now. The gentle kind of fierce that makes sick children laugh even when they're scared. Some nights she comes over after a long shift, kicks off her shoes, and falls asleep on my couch with her head in my lap, just like when she was little. I stroke her edges and thank God for second acts. And me, I'm still here, still cooking Sunday dinner, still teaching the young mamas at church how to stretch $1 and a prayer at the same time. My knees creak more than they used to, and I take the stairs slowly, but my heart is lighter than it's been in years. Last spring, the school dedicated the new library wing. They asked Jamal, who was senior class president, to cut the ribbon. When they pulled the curtain back, there was a plaque, the General Anthony T. Carter and Family Literacy Wing, dedicated to the belief that every child's truth deserves to be heard. Underneath, smaller letters, in gratitude to Mrs. Laura Harrington, whose courage in teaching and learning made this possible. I stood in the back that day, watching Jamal shake hands and pose for pictures, watching Mrs. Harrington wipe tears while her own daughter, now 8 years old, tugged at her sleeve, asking for juice. Two women who started out on opposite sides of a wound, standing in the same healed place. After the ceremony, Mrs. Harrington found me by the punch bowl. Double quotes Ms. Evelyn. She said, voice soft, "I never got to thank you properly, for not letting me run away from what I did, staying there, fixing it day by day. It changed everything. Not just for the kids. For me." I looked at her for a long time, really looked. The lines around her eyes were deeper now. The kind you earn instead of the kind you buy cream to hide. "Baby," I told her, "we all get taught lessons we didn't sign up for. The ones who pass the test are the ones willing to sit back down at the desk after they fail." She laughed a little through the tears, hugged me like she meant it. Jamal came over then, towering over both of us, and wrapped an arm around each of our shoulders. "Come on, y'all," he said. "Grandma's sweet potato pie is in the car, and if we don't hurry, Coach is gonna eat it all." We walked out together, 3 generations, 2 women who once circled each other like wary cats, and 1 young man who turned pain into a doorway wide enough for all of us to walk through. That night, after everybody went home and the house was quiet again, I sat on my porch with a slice of that pie and watched the stars come out one by one. I thought about that day in 3rd grade when my grandson's truth was too big for somebody else's imagination. I thought about how love sometimes looks like staying, sometimes looks like leaving, sometimes looks like showing up in dress blues, sometimes looks like writing 37 letters to the school board. Mostly, I thought about how the Lord doesn't waste a single hurt if we let use it to grow something beautiful. The fireflies were back, blinking soft across the yard like they were keeping time with my heart. I smiled up at the sky and whispered the same thing. I whisper every night, thank you for the story. Lord, thank you for letting me live long enough to see the ending be merciful. And somewhere in the dark, a breeze moved through the trees, like an answer. So here I am, an old woman with a porch light that stays on a little longer than it needs to, thinking about how one afternoon in a third-grade classroom changed the whole direction of so many lives. I learned something I hope you hold close to. The moment somebody tries to make a child feel small for telling the truth, that's the moment the grown folks better stand all the way up. Not with screaming or cursing or tearing the world down, but with the quiet, unshakable kind of strength that says, not my baby, not today, not ever. We don't always get the apology we deserve. We don't always see the person who hurt us have to sit in the mess they made. But when we choose to protect a child's dignity anyway, when we teach them their worth is not up for debate, something shifts in the atmosphere. That shift ripples farther than any punishment ever could. So I ask you, the way I ask myself on quiet nights, when somebody tries to shrink your truth, or your child's truth, or your people's truth, did you stand tall enough to make the room uncomfortable? And when you were the one who got it wrong, did you have the courage to stay in the classroom and learn? That's the only question that matters in the end. If this story touched something in you, share it with somebody who needs to remember they come from greatness, even when the world tries to say otherwise. Leave me a comment and tell me, have you ever had to prove your truth to someone who didn't want to believe it? How did you carry yourself through it? And if you haven't already, subscribe, turn on the bell, come sit with me every week. We're family here. This is Mama Eve, reminding you, your story is bigger than their doubt. God bless you, babies. I'll see you in the next one.